One statement by a group of British scholars really struck me because this is a letter by communications and media scholars on British news media coverage of the war in Gaza. We write to express our shock and dismay at what we can only describe as a dangerous suspension of journalistic values. Israeli government and army officials are using genocidal language in reference to Palestinians, including terms such as human animals, barbarians, and savages. Include the colonial context of Israel's more than 50 years long military occupation of Palestinian territories and 16 years of siege on Gaza. You will note that more than a dozen journalists have died in recent weeks, days. And unfortunately, if there is no credible information coming from the ground, because most of at the moment, there are very few foreign reporters, in fact, next to none in Gaza. Hello and welcome to New Wave Global. I'm back with some updates on the ongoing global crises that has now become a bit tangled due to the conflict in the Middle East. And of course, there's so much information out there, there's so much of news and misinformation. So I'm just going to highlight some of the key things that were of interest yesterday when I was browsing through media. And in particular, one statement by a group of British scholars really struck me because this is a letter by communications and media scholars on British news media coverage of the war in Gaza. And they have, it's an open letter signed by dozens, in fact, 178 scholars of media studies. And they say, as scholars of journalism, media, and communications, we write to express our shock and dismay at what we can only describe as a dangerous suspension of journalistic values, standards, and norms in much of the British news media coverage of the war in Gaza. Israeli government and army officials are using genocidal language in reference to Palestinians, including terms such as human animals, barbarians, and savages. Several British news media outlets not only fail to report this and warn against it, but at times seem to be inciting violence against Palestinians through insinuations that hospitals are legitimate military targets. This statement further says that these developments, I quote, implicates media institutions and personnel in accusations of war crimes and violations of international law. The letter further says, we note that much of the coverage omits key facts and context necessary for understanding this war, including that Gaza is an occupied territory under international law that has been under 16 years of illegal siege. The British scholars further say we observe widespread selective use of evidence in reporting. While unsubstantiated Israeli claims are reported in full and treated as trustworthy, Palestinian claims are shrouded in doubt and suspicion. We note double standards in the coverage of the tragic suffering of civilians in Gaza and in Israel, and a biased deployment of emotion in the news. While Israeli civilian victims are rightly mourned, Palestinian victims are reported as nameless numbers. Furthermore, discrimination seeps into the use of language. We observe the widespread deployment of the passive voice when it comes to the killing of Palestinians so as not to implicate Israel. As media scholars, we have studied the dangers of hate and disinformation on social media. We are disturbed to see established news organizations that pride themselves on their impartiality become sources of dangerous misinformation. We remember the coverage of the ongoing Ukraine war and how British media rose to the task of condemning occupation and voicing support for the victims of military aggression. Palestinians are no less human than Israelis or Ukrainians, and should not be treated as such by British media. The British public deserves balanced and truthful information on this escalating war. Considering the above, we believe it is vital that news organizations take the following steps. And they outline these steps. Number one, critically question and provide evidence on Israeli claims in the name of accuracy, fairness, and truth. Number two, challenge Israeli officials with difficult questions and not just simply give them uninterrupted airtime. Number three, include the colonial context of Israel's more than 50 years long military occupation of Palestinian territories and 16 years of siege on Gaza, repeatedly condemned by the UN and human rights organizations. Number four, include Palestinian voices in your coverage, not to trap them into denouncing the acts of Hamas as a precondition of any discussion, as if they are guilty by virtue of their identity, but to offer a human perspective and context. Number five, demand that journalists gain access to Gaza and condemn the killing and targeting of journalists doing their jobs in the region. Number six, immediately rescind actions against Palestinian and Arab journalists reporting on the conflict. So while there's so much material out there that testifies to some of the issues raised by this letter, you will note that more than a dozen journalists have died in recent weeks, days. And unfortunately, if there is no credible information coming from the ground, because most of at the moment there are very few foreign reporters, in fact next to none in Gaza, and if information is not coming out from there, which is accurate and fair, how would the world know? How would the international community frame its reaction? So let's hope that these voices make a difference. I do salute and thank these scholars and professors across the UK, and there are many signatories from the US as well. And I hope that they sign this, more and more people sign this letter. These are experts of their field, and they are non-partisan. The list, as you can see, includes all sorts of names, and I hope that we get a fairer and more accurate coverage of the ongoing crisis in Gaza. I will be back with more updates. Thank you.